Welcome to Session 6 of the coaching training. My name is Dale Jones. I'm pastor at Sterlingwood Church. We're located on the east side of Houston, Texas. Today, we want to have a conversation about the power of vows. Vows are an idea that was presented to you or first introduced to you in the 101 retreat, and then later also in the 201 process. I personally have discovered that as I've got my hands around the idea of vows and began to apply these principles in my life, that I have experienced a considerable amount of freedom in my own life. And so understanding and applying the principles of vows is very important to each of us as coaches. So let's begin by remembering what a vow is. Essentially, a vow is decisions that we make as young people, as children, maybe as adolescents, about the way that we must be in this world in order to be safe. Now, we've all had experiences with authority figures in our lives: parents, teachers, pastors, police, the list could go on and on. We've all had experiences with authority figures. Sometimes those authority figures exert authority over our lives in ways that are positive, in ways that are appropriate and are helpful. But of course, we have all had experiences where authority has been exerted over our lives in ways that are hurtful. Sometimes hurtful to the level of leaving very deep wounds. For some of you, it may even mean going to a level of neglect or even abuse. And so in our lives, we all experience wounding and hurt that comes about as a result of inappropriate use or exercise of authority over our lives. We also experience woundings in our lives, sometimes just from the everyday interaction with people, other people in this fallen world. Girl arrives at a birthday party. She's excited about this party. She walks in and another group of girls gather together and begin to make fun of her for the dress that she's wearing. A young boy in love for the first time receives a note from his girlfriend that says that she no longer likes him but likes his friend instead. And so these are things that happen every day in our lives. I mean, nobody can escape these kind of woundings, these kind of hurts, and so we've all had experience with this. Now here's what happens as we experience that kind of hurt. Inevitably, our mind will kick into overdrive, evaluating, exactly analyzing, what caused this hurt and how can I prevent being hurt like this again. And as we begin to analyze that, and it's not always at a very conscious level, it's just something very natural. We begin to think about it, analyze it, and we begin to come up with ways that we can prevent being hurt, ways of being that will help us prevent being hurt again. For some of us, that may be being shy. For another, it may be the life of the party, the funny guy, the sad guy. It may be the angry guy or the sullen person or the person that's very angry. And you could go on and on with the list of ways of being that come about as a result of our desire to protect ourselves from those kind of hurts. And as we practice these things, we begin to figure out, what works for me and what's working in my life. Then I begin to practice those behaviors over and over and over again until they become well-honed, deeply held habits in my life. Now, because these things happen, these experiences happen often when we're very young, and those behaviors develop over a long period of time, most often we don't see those vows or those behaviors as a decision that we made or a choice that we made. We just see them as, that's who I am. Catholic theologians for many years have identified that that's who I am as our false self. Again, going back to those experiences, we have that experience in our life, that wounding takes place, we are hurt, we are shamed, we feel guilt or humiliation, and we have that experience in our lives, and inevitably we will then turn around and give a meaning to that experience. And oftentimes we have people in our lives that will help us with that. Maybe an authority figure that helps us assign meaning to what has happened in our lives. You're stupid. You're inept. You're incompetent. You're just a burden. You'll never amount to anything. And again, the list could go on. You can just fill in the blank. But that meaning is applied to that experience in our lives. And as that meaning is applied to the experience, we begin to believe it. And again, our mind will begin to look for verification of the meaning that we've given to that experience. Almost unconsciously, we begin to look for some verification. And of course, as we begin to look, it seems that other experiences in our lives seem to verify what we have said or what somebody else has said about us. Again, what happens is you'll see that what happens is you no longer are talking about the event, the experience, based upon what happened, but you begin to talk about the experience based upon the meaning that you have assigned to it. The boy that felt rejected by his girlfriend no longer says, well, my girlfriend dumped me. Instead, he says, I'm such a loser, my girlfriend can't even stand me. And as that meaning to his life begins to be applied over and over again, gets driven deeper and deeper into his life until he no longer is that person that really God intended him to be. He no longer sees himself, or the girl no longer sees herself as the person that God really intended them to be, living in freedom and in the joy of God's presence, but they become that loser that they've assigned the meaning to that experience. And so that is the false self. The false self has been created, and the person that God really intended you to be is shoved back into a closet and silenced, and we begin to experience life. We begin to communicate with God and relate to others around us out of that false self instead of out of the person that God really intended us to be. And so the challenge that's really before us is to recognize that false self, to recognize and understand the meaning that we have given to those experiences in our lives, and to be able to separate that meaning from the truth. I believe the process that we're talking about here is one that Paul identifies in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning in verse 4, when he says, the weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And here it is, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. I know the power of vows from personal experience. I grew up in a family of 4 boys. I was the youngest of 4 sons. And never realized it really when I was growing up and I was at the time, but grew up in a very competitive atmosphere. My mother herself was the oldest of 12 children. And she grew up on a farm during the Great Depression with an alcoholic father. And my mother began to place a high priority on achievement, and rightfully so, to lift her out of the poverty and lift her out of the painful life that she had lived as a child growing up. But my mom placed a high priority on achievement, and as I look back on life, I realized that I had begun to really strive to win my mother's approval. And for me, that eventually began to grow out of not just winning my mother's approval, but I felt a necessity, a need to win everyone's approval. Now, what that looked like for me was this. Sometimes I would just work very hard. I would work very hard and seek to achieve in order to win approval. And you know, that's evident in a lot of areas of my life. I mean, if anyone just looks at my life, you see the results of hard work and achievement. But I also discovered some other ways of being. I discovered that same level of approval could be gained by lying or by cheating. So working hard was one way, but lying and cheating would also achieve approval from people and would get the same result, net the same result for me. And so in my life, that became my vow. My vow was that I would win approval at all costs. And that's really who I was. And so I would fight, struggle to win approval. If I did not win approval by hard work or by lying or by cheating or by some form or fashion, if I still sensed disapproval for someone or criticism coming toward me from someone, then my autopilot response, what I would do is I would begin to sulk and get angry. And that worked for me, because inevitably becoming angry and sulking would shut down whatever negative communication I sensed was coming to me, whatever threatening communication I was receiving, that would usually shut it down. A good example of that happened in my life when, with my wife. We were on our way to San Antonio one weekend for a kind of a romantic weekend getaway. And as we were driving down Interstate 10 toward San Antonio, my wife asked me a question about a project that needed to be done in our church. It was a project that related to the church property, and it was something that really needed to be done because it did affect the way things looked on our church and the property, and this is something that she is particularly interested in. But when she asked me this question about this project that had not been done, I immediately felt my anxiety begin to rise. I felt my neck beginning to stiffen up. I felt my grip tighten on the steering wheel. I felt my heart rate beginning to rise just a little bit. And what was happening? Well, my vow of acceptance and approval was being triggered. Immediately, what I sensed from her was an attack, that she was trying to say that I was inept, that I hadn't taken care of things, that I wasn't succeeding, that I wasn't accomplishing what I needed to do. That's what I heard. And I even told her that. You know, she continued to assure me that that wasn't her intention at all, that she wasn't trying to say any of those things. She just wanted to know about this project. And so this tension continued to rise. My vow continued to push my anxiety up, and I took the next step, which was to try to deflect her criticism by pointing her to all the good things that I had accomplished. I began to enumerate all the things that we had done and what had been done, and she congratulated me on all of those things and then said, well, but let's go back to the question. And for me, I just felt like that was an attack. And so my anxiety continued to go up, and it ended, as those kind of things often did with me, with an angry outburst. I said, all you do is criticize, and you never do anything to help. It was just as quiet in that car as it was just now in this room. The truth was that my wife labored tirelessly beside me for many years, starting this church, and we had planted the church I'm pastoring, and she had worked tirelessly and sacrificed much. And so what I was saying was just a blatant lie. But it did succeed in doing what that autopilot always did. That is, it shut the conversation down. It shut the conversation down, but at the same time it left a wall. The wall of division, this dance, this way of being that had developed in our lives just continued, and the wall got higher and the wall got thicker, and what was worse is my wife felt the sting, and she felt the pain of my anger. That's the power of a vow. The vow has the power to prevent you, to prevent me from being who God really wants us to be, to pursue a pathway of transformation. What was really an awakening to me was to realize that how I was treating my wife in that situation was disobedient to God. Now, the good news about this story is that at the point that this took place, I was in the middle of a 201 process. I had enrolled in 201. I was going through 201. I had a coach. And you know, it was interesting. I remembered as I reflected on that event, and as I stepped back from it that evening and the next morning, and I thought about what was happening, and I began to replay all the things that I had said and all the things that had happened. I remembered a question that my coach had asked me some time before, and he had asked me this. He said, "Dale, do you think that you love your wife, that you show love to your wife in the way that the Bible really tells you to?" And my response to that was, well, you know, I'll think about that. I'll go away and I'll give that some consideration. But what I was actually thinking at that moment was, heck yes. You know, yeah, I love my wife the way I'm supposed to. I'm a pastor. I preached whole sermons on how to love your wife. He never said, this is what was so for you. He just asked the question. And as I began to reflect on what was happening, I realized that I really didn't love my wife the way the Scripture said. I did in many other ways, but in this way, I was continually hurting her and disrespecting her. And so I made a decision right there. See, I had already recognized my vow. The vow that I've shared with you, I already recognized it. I already knew what some of my autopilot was. I just was not able to control it. But I did make a decision then that I was going to go back and clean this mess up, and I was going to take responsibility for my actions and for my way of being, and I was going to try to change these things and let God change these things in me. And I'm here to tell you today that that was the beginning of a transformation for me. That has all changed for me today. The power of those vows have begun to fall away as I've continually made a new declaration of a positive obedience over that vow, and those vows have begun to fall away and their power over me. Vows, by nature, are difficult to see because they're such a part of who we are. Not only are they difficult to see, but there's often a great deal of resistance in us to actually recognize them, to acknowledge them, and then to make a decision to let God do something in our life about them. And that's simply because they're such a deep part of who we are. One of the key tasks for you and for me as a coach is to help people, help those that we're coaching, recognize, understand, identify, and acknowledge those vows in their lives, to acknowledge the power that those vows have exerted over their lives to keep them from being the person that God wants them to be, to help them see that, and then to bring that with as much integrity and with as much authenticity as possible into their daily workout with God and to their relationship with a few other people. Now, the good news is that, you know, it's not up to us to figure out how to make that happen. The homework assignments that the 201 participant is doing on a weekly basis, those homework assignments are specifically designed to drive those vows and that autopilot to the surface to help them see it. Our task is simply to guide them as much as possible, to help them, to assist them in that process, and to be there to listen to them and reflect back to them, and just to coach them as much as we can in that process. Now, I want to say at this point, I feel a necessity to say that when I was asked to do this video training, I was a little bit hesitant because, frankly, I'm rather new to this whole coaching process myself. And so I was a little hesitant, thinking that, you know, what do I have to offer? But based on that, I think I can also kind of relate to what maybe some of you, as you watch this, may feel. Maybe you're feeling inadequate. Maybe you're feeling like, you know, hesitant to even step into this role. And so I understand that, and I just want to encourage you that we're not called to be perfect in this. In fact, you know, I want to be the best coach I can be. I want to learn everything that I can. I want to master as many skills as I can to be the best coach I can be. But having said all of that, the greatest encouragement that I have for me is just the realization that God Himself is more interested in surfacing the vows and coaching the person that I'm coaching than I am. And so what that means is that it's not just up to me. It doesn't just fall on my shoulders. God is on our side in this, and He wants it to be successful. And I'm going under the idea too, the belief that I will do the best that I can. I will learn all that I can and do the best that I can, but my God can fill in the gaps. My God is able to do that. So in closing, there are a couple of things that I, as a newbie to coaching, would like to just maybe hold out to you as some things to think about if we're going to pursue this and continue, and I hope that you will. The first thing that I would hold out to you to be effective as a coach would be just to be teachable. That it's not a closed game thing. There's not an end to this, and that we continue to learn. Even what you're doing right now, I commend you for taking this coach's training and pressing into it, and you've made it now to session 6, and I commend you for that. And not just to do it as a check off to say, well, I've done this and I've done that, but to approach it with the idea that I want to learn all that I can so that I can be the best that I can be for the Lord, that He can use me in this process. And so being a learner and then continuing to learn, taking advantage of every opportunity, remaining coachable yourself, making sure that you're still in contact and connection with your own coach and being in that process, and then continuing to learn. Even this evening, after the taping of this session that I'm doing right now, this evening there will be a gathering, a meeting for coaches in which we're just going to try to sharpen some of the skills that we've learned and maybe learn some new skills. And so staying in that process. The second thing that I would hold out to you that I think is essential, at least it is for me, is that the idea that we stay in the faith walking process ourselves. It's not like we've done it. We've done 201 and we finished, and we're now moving on to something else. We're all in the process. And so for me, that's really important that I remain in the process. An example of how that's important, especially as relates to the power of vows. It wasn't long after I was coaching that the person that I was coaching became really critical of the material, the homework and the material that we were doing. He became really critical of that and really angry at me for pressing him on that material. And now, what did I say my vow was of acceptance, and I can't take criticism? Well, automatically my vow is being triggered. But because I'm in this process, I was aware of that. I was aware of my own tendency. I was aware of my vow. I was aware of what my autopilot was. And I was able, in that moment, as that began to happen, I was able to successfully just say to all of that, step aside. I just was able to lay it aside and refocus my attention on the person that I'm coaching, and I really began to listen to what he was saying. Even though his anxiety was up and his anger was up, I listened to what he was saying, and I was able to remain calm. See, that's a miracle. I was able to remain calm, and I was able to say to him, I just want to encourage you this week as you go away, to take time in your daily workout, in your solitude, to just maybe bring this question before the Lord. Just ask this question: what is it about this that's really stirring me up? What is it about this that's really triggering my anger, making me angry? I said, just go away and think about that. And then the other thing I want you to think about, just to consider this question: how might your vow be connected to these emotions that we're talking about? Is there any connection at all? And he agreed to do that, and we left it at that. And it was a couple of weeks. The following week, we were kind of back on the same track and he had done some processing, and I just encouraged him again and took that back again. By the second week, he came into the meeting and he excitedly said, "You know what? I realize that my anger, what I'm dealing with, is the result of my vow." And he was able to articulate how it was connected and how his vow was involved in his anger. And I'm saying all of that to simply say this: if I had let my own vows be triggered at the beginning of this conversation with this person, if I had let my vows and my autopilot kick in, I never would have been able to focus and see what was happening in his life, and to be able to give him some direction and some guidance that ended up being a breakthrough for him. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily always going to be successful in that, but it is important that I'm recognizing and understanding the power of vows in my own life, even as I'm trying to coach someone else. It's not something that we're done with and we move on. It's always something that's present in our lives. So I just want to encourage you as you continue in the coaching process that you recognize the power of vows in the person you're coaching, but also in your own life, and to stay in the process. As a pastor for almost 30 years, I can think of nothing with the exception of leading someone to faith in Christ, that has given me greater joy nor greater satisfaction than coaching someone and seeing a person begin to gain freedom over those vows in their life, to see them begin to find freedom and release in those areas, and a new joy in their relationships. And that's given me great joy to experience that and to be a part of that. And you know what? I think it's going to be that way for you as well. God bless you, and I'm praying for you as you continue in your coaching journey.